Hi everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so YouTube keeps showing you more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin. I don't tell this story often. I've tried a couple times over drinks with friends, but the way they look at me when I get to the part that matters, it makes me shut up. They think I'm either lying or insane. And maybe I am. But I can. Still smell the pine needles, still hear the voices, and some nights when I wake up at 3 in the morning, I swear I can still feel that breath against my ear. This happened when I was 17 in the summer of 2004. I grew up in Texas, in a town that most people only know because of the lake nearby, Lake Whitney. If you've never been, it's a big sprawling reservoir with cliffs and coves and pine woods that stretch deep into the hills. My friends and I would swim there, fish there, drink there. But this story isn't about a fun night with friends. It's about the first time I camped alone. It was late July and I'd just gotten my driver's license a month earlier. I was restless in that way only teenagers can be, tired of being told where to go and when to be home, eager to prove I could handle myself. My parents were fighting a lot that summer, and the house didn't feel like somewhere I wanted to be. So I decided on a humid Thursday afternoon that I'd pack up a tent, some food, and my father's old camping lantern, and spend the night out near the lake. By the time I pulled up to the trailhead, it was nearly 7 o'clock. The sky was bruising into pink and orange. The air smelled like dust and cedar. I parked my beat-up Honda Civic slung on my backpack and started the hike in. I remember how alive the woods felt at first. Cicadas screaming, crickets chirping, the occasional bullfrog bellowing from somewhere down near the water. The trail wasn't official, just a narrow strip of flattened earth my friends and I had walked a dozen times before. I knew it led to a clearing about half a mile in, right on the edge of the trees, with a view of the lake. That's where I set up my tent. I had a small fire going by the time the sun dipped fully below the horizon. The flames painted the trunks around me in flashes of orange, the shadows leaping and stretching as if alive. I roasted a hot dog on a stick. I cracked open a Dr. Pepper. I felt in those first hours proud of myself, independent, like maybe this was the first step toward being the kind of man who could take care of himself. By 11, the fire had burned low. I'd put it out with a bottle of water and climbed into the tent, lying back on the thin camping mat with my flashlight tucked beside me. The night pressed close, heavy and dark, the fabric of the tent barely keeping it at bay. I drifted toward sleep, and then the whispering started. At first I thought it was the wind, soft, shivering through the pines. But it wasn't right. The sound had rhythm, shape. The syllables curled together into words. I sat up, heart knocking in my chest, and held my breath. There it was again, circling. Not from one place, but from everywhere, weaving in and out of the trees like children passing secrets in a classroom. The voices were high and thin, not adult voices, not boys my age either. They were smaller, younger. I unzipped the tent just enough to stick my head out. The clearing looked the same as it had an hour ago, dark, empty, still. The pine needles carpeted the ground in shadows. My fire pit sat cold and black. But the voices kept moving, just beyond where the starlight ended. One of them came closer. So close I felt warm breath spill through the mesh of the tent. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, every muscle in my body seized. I yanked the zipper shut with shaking hands, fumbling for the flashlight. When I flicked it on, the white beam cut through the nylon walls, but there was nothing. No shadow of a body, no movement outside. Just the whispers fading again into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, knees pulled to my chest, clutching the flashlight until my hand cramped. The whispers rose and fell like waves, circling closer, then drifting away, as if whatever they belonged to was pacing around me. Sometimes they laughed, a soft titter like kids sharing a joke. Once they all stopped at once, and I thought maybe it was over. That's when a single voice rasped from directly behind my tent. "Go home." The sun eventually rose, slow and gray. The voices dissolved with it, vanishing like mist. I stumbled out of the tent bleary-eyed, convinced I'd find footprints or toys or something. But the clearing was exactly as I'd left it. I packed everything in record time. As I carried my gear back to the car, the woods felt wrong. Too quiet now, as if even the birds had decided to stay away. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I'd been half dreaming, that maybe the wind really had shaped itself into words. But later, when I unrolled the tent at home to let it air out, I noticed something on the fabric. Right where my head had been pressed against the side, there was a mark, a small perfect handprint. Too small to belong to me. Too high up to be my little cousin who sometimes played in our garage. I never camped alone again. And sometimes late at night when I'm driving near the lake, I swear I hear them in the trees, still whispering, still waiting. I should preface this by saying I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up in the woods of East Texas near Angelina National Forest, where camping and hiking were just normal parts of life. I've been out alone at night more times than I can count, sometimes with nothing but a headlamp and a pocket knife. Coyotes, snakes, even wild hogs. Those things never rattled me much. You respect them, keep your distance, and you'll usually be fine. What I saw out there last October was different. I can't explain it. Not in a way that makes sense. But I need to write it down, because ever since that night I've been waking up at 3:12 a.m. sharp, and when I do, my room isn't dark. There's always a faint glow on the wall, like a lantern's flame swaying just outside the window. It started on a Saturday, October 14th, 2023. The air had that sharp chill that comes right before real fall hits Texas, when the humidity finally breaks and you can breathe again. I'd been stressed with work, with bills piling up, so I decided to clear my head with a solo overnight hike. I chose a trail near Boykin Springs, one I'd done a dozen times before. By late afternoon, the woods were a dull copper, pine needles crunching underfoot. The sun filtered through the tall loblolly pines in long golden beams, and I remember thinking how still everything felt. Usually the forest carries a background hum, bugs, birds, the occasional rustle of something small. But it was quiet. Too quiet. I shrugged it off. I'd camped in silence plenty of times. My plan was simple: hike about 5 miles in, set up camp near a creek, and head back the next morning. I had a small tent, a headlamp, a cheap lantern, and enough food and water. I wasn't unprepared. It, too, was around 8:30 p.m. when I first saw it. I'd just gotten my fire going, nothing big, just enough to cook and keep warm. The stars were starting to punch through the sky, and the woods had settled into that pitch-black density you only get away from town. That's when a light appeared between the trees. At first, I thought it was another hiker. Maybe someone setting up camp late. It looked exactly like an old-fashioned lantern, a warm orange-yellow flame swaying slightly as if someone was walking with it. I stood up, squinting. "Hello?" I called. My voice cracked the stillness in a way that made me instantly regret yelling. The lantern didn't stop moving, didn't turn toward me. It just kept swaying slowly, weaving between the trees maybe 100 yards away. I figured whoever it was might not have heard me, so I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from camp, keeping the fire behind me. The ground was soft with pine needles, and each step seemed too loud. I walked for a minute, then two. The lantern never seemed to get closer, though it never moved farther away either. Always the same distance, a steady, rhythmic swing, like a pendulum in the dark. Something about that bothered me, the way it kept its distance. I stopped. The woods pressed in heavy around me. My flashlight beam looked small compared to the lantern's glow. "Hey," I shouted this time. "You out here camping?" The lantern paused, just for a second. Then it swayed again, continuing its strange, deliberate rhythm. The hair on my arms rose. I don't know why, but my gut told me not to follow. I backed up toward camp, forcing myself not to turn my back until I saw the faint flicker of my fire again. When I glanced over my shoulder, the lantern was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. Every crack of a branch, Every shift of wind against the tent made me sit up and listen. Around midnight, I thought I heard something soft, a dragging sound like fabric brushing against bark. I held my breath, waiting for it again, but it never came. When I finally dozed off, my dreams were strange and vivid. In one, I was walking endlessly toward a light that never grew closer. In another, I was back in my childhood home, only every window glowed orange, and no matter how many curtains I pulled shut, the light still seeped through. I woke at 3:12 a.m., heart pounding. My tent glowed faintly, like something outside was shining against the fabric. I froze, staring at the thin nylon wall. The light swayed. Left, right, left, right. I don't know how long I sat there before it finally faded. When I worked up the nerve to unzip the flap, nothing was there. The next morning, I packed up fast and got the hell out. The woods looked normal again. Dew on the leaves, squirrels chattering, sun breaking through. I tried convincing myself it had been another camper with an old lantern, and my mind just spun it into something else. But when I made it back to my car, there was something waiting on the hood. A dead pine cone, hollowed out, with a tiny wick of cloth sticking from its center, like a miniature lantern. I didn't go back to the forest after that. I figured leaving it alone was best. But that's not where it ended. The first night back home, I woke at 3:12 a.m. again. My bedroom wall flickered faintly orange, swaying like something was moving just outside. I live on the second floor. No streetlight near that side of the house. Told myself it was headlights from a passing car. But the glow didn't pass. It lingered, swinging rhythmically until I forced myself to close my eyes and pray for sleep. That was 2 weeks ago. It hasn't stopped since. Every night at 3:12, the light returns. Sometimes it's faint. Sometimes it's bright enough to fill the whole room in a golden glow. Last night, I swear I heard the soft creak of footsteps on my floorboards. And I think tonight if I look out the window, I won't see the lantern anymore. I'll see who's been carrying it. The first thing that felt wrong wasn't what I heard, but what I didn't. I'd been camping alone in the Sam Houston National Forest for the weekend. It was mid-October, one of those deceptively warm Texas nights where the air sits heavy on your skin like damp fabric. The forest around me had been alive all evening with the ordinary soundtrack of the woods, crickets chirping in their endless rhythm, the occasional low hoot of an owl somewhere high above, the scratchy rustle of armadillos nosing through undergrowth. Even the faraway croak of bullfrogs drifted in from a pond I'd passed on my way down the trail. And then, in an instant, all of it stopped. The silence hit me like a physical weight. Not a pause, not a lull. Gone. One moment the woods were alive, the next it was as though someone had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. I froze, sitting on the folding chair I'd set by the fire, staring into the blackness between the trees. My fire crackled, but every sound it made felt swallowed, too small against the massive emptiness pressing in from the woods. I looked at my watch. 3:03 a.m. That detail burned into my mind because I glanced at it the same instant I realized how wrong the silence was. I don't know why I checked. Maybe I expected an answer in the digital numbers glowing on the screen, some rational explanation for why the world felt suddenly hollow. But the time only made me feel worse. 3 in the morning, that in-between hour where the night feels heavier than it should, where anything can happen and nobody would ever know. A branch snapped not far away either. Not the kind of pop you get from wood shifting in the night or from a raccoon nosing through deadfall. This was heavy, deliberate, like someone had stepped down with weight. I held my breath. My skin prickled hot and cold at once. A crawling sensation, like ants across my scalp. Another branch snapped, this time from a different direction. The fire suddenly felt too small, too fragile. Its glow reached only a few feet into the clearing, leaving the edges swallowed in perfect dark. I couldn't see what circled me, but I could feel it, something moving just beyond the edge of vision, pacing slow, steady, purposeful. I whispered to myself without meaning to. Deer. It's just deer. But deer don't circle, and deer don't wait for silence. The sound came again. Crunch, snap, breathing, low, wet, just on the edge of hearing. My ears strained, my heartbeat filling the void where the night creatures should have been. I stood up, nearly knocking my chair over, and grabbed the flashlight from the table beside my tent. I swung the beam wide, cutting across the trees, the light scattering against trunks and brush. Nothing. Just endless dark and the glowing fog of my own breath in the beam. Hello? My voice cracked like a teenager's, thin and pathetic against the silence. The night gave me nothing back. I turned in a slow circle, keeping the light moving. Every instinct screamed not to look away from the black gaps between the trees. But no matter where I shone the beam, there was nothing. Only when I clicked the flashlight off and let the firelight reclaim the clearing did the breathing return. It was closer now. My stomach turned to water. I backed up toward the tent, pulse hammering, every muscle in my body begging me to run. But where would I go? I was miles from my car, miles from any help. The trail was nothing but narrow dirt threading into the trees, and whatever was out, there was faster than me. The fire sputtered, wood collapsing into coals with a hiss. I snapped the flashlight on again, but this time I kept the beam low, aimed at the ground just past the fire. That's when I saw it. A footprint. Fresh, clear in the dirt. Not from me. I hadn't walked that side of the clearing. Not a boot print either. Bare. Human. The heel dug deep. The toes spread wide. My hand shook so badly the beam jittered across. The ground. Another step beside it. Then another. Leading into the tree line. I turned the light upward, my throat dry as dust. The trees stood motionless, but just past the glow of the beam, I swore I caught a glimpse of pale skin. A shoulder, maybe the side of a face. Gone when I blinked. I don't remember making the choice to move, but the next thing I knew, I was unzipping my tent with clumsy, frantic fingers, throwing myself inside. I yanked the zipper closed and pressed the flashlight between my knees, trying to breathe without making sound. The fabric walls of the tent felt like paper, useless against whatever was out there, but the thin barrier gave me some twisted illusion of safety. For hours, or what felt like hours, I sat there, every muscle locked, straining to hear past the blood pounding in my ears. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes there were steps, once close enough that the ground beneath me trembled. At some point, my fear tipped into exhaustion. My eyelids drooped. I told myself I'd just close them for a second. Just a second. When I woke, sunlight filtered weak through the nylon walls. Birds sang. Insects droned. The forest was alive again, like the night before had been a hallucination. I crawled out of the tent, stiff and aching. My fire was nothing but gray ash. My chair lay on its side. And in the dirt around the clearing, circling my tent in a wide, deliberate loop, were bare footprints. Hundreds of them. Some pressed so deep the toes had torn into the soil. I don't know why I'm writing this, maybe because if I don't, I'll convince myself it never happened. That it was just a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But it wasn't a dream. I can still feel it when I close my eyes. The weight of that silence, the steady drip, the smile. It was September 2022, and I was camping alone in Huntsville State Park in Texas. I'm not exactly a solo adventurer type, but my friends bailed last minute on the trip, and I had already paid for my permit. I told myself it would be good for me, some peace and quiet, just me in the woods. The kind of thing you convince yourself you want when you've been stuck in front of screens too long. That Friday evening was normal enough. The sun was still hot when I arrived, baking the pine needles along the ground until they gave off that dry, resinous smell. I parked, signed in, hiked about 2 miles to my reserved campsite, and set up my little green tent in a flat clearing under a cluster of tall loblolly pines. It wasn't remote wilderness. The state park has trails and other campers scattered here and there. But once the sun dipped, I felt the solitude settle in like a blanket. Crickets started their steady drone. Somewhere distant, an owl hooted. I ate some jerky and trail mix, washed it down with lukewarm water, then zipped myself into the tent around 10. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. The sound was what pulled me from sleep, a steady drip, drip, drip like water hitting nylon. My first thought was condensation or maybe a light rain starting up. I reached for my headlamp, clicked it on, and froze. There was no rain. The forest outside was still. The air smelled of damp pine and dirt, but the sky through the mesh of my tent was clear. Yet the sound continued. Drip, drip, drip. I unzipped the flap halfway, poked my headlamp beam out. That's when I saw him. High, up in the branches of the pine directly above my tent, maybe 20 feet up, crouched a man. His knees were bent like a frog's, his bare feet gripping the bark, his arms hooked against the trunk for balance. He was lean, too lean, just a silhouette of wiry muscle under pale skin that seemed almost gray in the beam. His face was tilted down at me, eyes locked, and his mouth was stretched in a grin so wide it looked painful. And from that grin, thick, strands of saliva dangled, glistening in my headlamp's light, falling in slow droplets onto the top of my tent. Drip, drip, drip. I couldn't move. My whole body locked up in a paralysis I didn't know was possible. My mind screamed to slam the flap shut, but something in me knew I couldn't show fear, couldn't let him see me panic. So I swallowed hard, turned off the lamp, and sat perfectly, still in the dark, listening. The dripping slowed, then stopped. For maybe 10 minutes, there was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. I don't remember making the decision, but I started packing. Slowly, silently. I rolled my sleeping bag, stuffed it into my pack. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the zipper closed. I kept my eyes down, afraid to look through the mesh again. When everything was packed, I unzipped the flap in one smooth motion, slung my bag over my shoulder, and stepped out into the clearing. I didn't look up. Not once. My whole body wanted to, but some primal part of me whispered that if I did, I wouldn't walk away. I just started moving. Slow at first, forcing myself not to run, not to break the spell. My boots sank into the carpet of pine needles, crunching softly. The air was still, thick, heavy. When I was about 30 yards from the tent, I finally glanced back. The tent was empty now, but the tree above it, I couldn't see him. But the branches swayed gently, like something had just shifted its weight, higher up. I kept walking. After about 5 minutes, I let myself speed up, then faster. Soon I was half jogging through the dark, swinging the weak beam of my headlamp over the trail, breath coming sharp and shallow. Every rustle in the underbrush made my stomach clench. By the time I reached the parking lot, my chest was tight and my clothes were damp with sweat. My car was the only one there. I fumbled the keys, yanked the door open, threw my gear into the back, and peeled out of the lot with gravel spitting under the tires. I didn't stop until I was back in town, when I finally pulled over in a gas station lot. I sat there with the engine running, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. That grin, those eyes, the way he didn't move. I haven't been back to Huntsville State Park since. Hell, I haven't been camping since. Every time I even think about pitching a tent, I hear that sound again. Drip, drip, drip. And I wonder if he's still out there, crouched in the trees, waiting for the next person to unzip their tent in the middle of the night. I don't know why I'm writing this, except maybe because I can't sleep anymore. I've been lying awake every night staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to happen again. My girlfriend tells me I look hollow, like someone carved the rest of me out and left only skin. She doesn't know the half of it, because how do you tell someone you heard your dead mother calling your name in the woods? It started earlier this summer, June 14th, 2023. I remember the exact date because it was the day after a storm ripped through Comal County. Huge winds, lightning that set half the hillsides glowing in the night. I'd driven out toward a stretch of land near the Devil's Backbone. If you know Texas, you might know that place. A winding high ridge where accidents happen too often. where locals whisper about lights on the road that don't belong to any car, or shapes that step out of the cedar only to vanish when you swerve. It's one of those places you laugh about, in daylight and avoid when the sun goes down. I wasn't there for ghosts, though. I was trying to clear my head. My dad had passed the previous fall, and I hadn't really let myself sit with it. First Mom, 5 years back, then Dad. Suddenly there was no one left who'd known me before I could tie my shoes. Grief makes you do dumb things, like parking your truck near a fence line and walking into cedar scrub with only a flashlight and a bottle of water. I told myself I'd just hike a mile or two, take in the silence. It was quiet at first, too quiet. The storm had left the air sticky, metallic. The cedar trees gave off that sharp, resinous smell that makes your throat tight if you breathe too deep. Every step sank into damp soil. I could hear water dripping somewhere, but there weren't streams up there, just limestone and rock that ate rain like a sponge. The silence was so deep it felt heavy. No birds, no cicadas. Not even the distant sound of traffic from 306, just me, my boots, and the occasional snap of a branch. About an hour in, I sat down against a cedar trunk to drink water. The sun had dropped lower than I realized, and shadows stretched like black claws across the limestone. That's when I heard it. Danny. I froze. The voice was soft, cracked. My mother's voice. My mother who had been dead since 2018. Danny, come this way. It came from deeper in the trees, faint but distinct. If you've ever lost someone, close, you know the way your brain keeps pieces of them. The way you think you hear their laugh at a grocery store, or smell their perfume on a stranger passing by. That's what I told myself. My mind was playing tricks, grief echoing in a bad place. But then it came again, clearer this time. Come here, baby. That was her. That exact phrase. She'd called me baby, even when I was too old to stand it. And she said it with that half laugh in her throat like she knew I'd roll my eyes. My chest locked up so tight I could barely breathe. Mom? I whispered before I could stop myself. The trees swallowed my voice, but something answered. Not with words at first, just movement. The crunch of footsteps on damp earth, the swish of cedar branches parting. And then, closer. Come this way. It wasn't soft anymore. It was urgent, raspy, like someone forcing the air out of ruined lungs. I shot to my feet, dropped the water bottle, and backed against the cedar trunk. My flashlight beam wobbled, slicing through the underbrush. Nothing, just tangled roots and bark slick with sap. Don't know how long I stood there, frozen. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. When the voice came again, it was no longer my mother's voice. It was deeper, guttural, angry. Come. That broke me. I bolted. I didn't think about direction, just tore through the trees until my chest burned. Branches whipped my face, tore my shirt. I stumbled down a rocky slope and landed hard in damp leaves. For a second I thought I heard footsteps chasing me, heavy and fast, but when I looked back there was only the forest. Silent. Waiting. I didn't move again. Couldn't. My flashlight had cracked on a rock, flickering uselessly. The sun was gone, replaced by a dim wash of moonlight through the branches. I pulled my knees up, pressed myself against another cedar, and sat there trembling for hours. Every so often I swore I heard my name, whispered low and mean, but I never saw anything. When the sky finally shifted gray with dawn, I stumbled back to the truck. My shirt was torn, my arms covered in scratches, but I was alive. Somehow, I told myself it had been a dream, or maybe a panic attack. I hadn't been sleeping well. My brain could have twisted the wind, the creak of trees, into something else. That's what I wanted to believe. But here's the part that keeps me up now. 3 nights later, I woke to hear my mother's voice calling my name again. Not outside, not in a dream. From the hallway of my own house. The floorboards creaked, slow, deliberate. Then a low rasp. Danny, come this way. I locked my bedroom door. I haven't opened it at night since, and last night, I swear to God, I heard the voice right outside the door. It whispered through the crack at the bottom. Soft and patient, I found you. I don't usually tell this story because every time I try, people either laugh or look at me like I'm exaggerating. Maybe I am. I've gone over it in my head so many times that I've started to doubt what I saw myself. But I know what I felt, and that was real enough. This happened in October of 2016, deep in the Big Thicket National Preserve in Texas. For those who don't know, Big Thicket isn't just a park. It's this sprawling, almost endless wilderness of tangled trees, marshes, and backwoods trails that seem to go nowhere. It's beautiful in the daytime, but when night falls, the place feels prehistoric. It gets so quiet that your own breathing sounds too loud. I'd gone out there to camp alone for the weekend. I'd done solo camping trips before, mostly in state parks. But I wanted something more remote this time. Big Thicket had always fascinated me with its mix of swamps, pine forests, and those legends you hear about hunters and hikers seeing strange lights or even hearing voices out in the brush. I never believed in any of that, but I thought it would make for a good story to tell friends later. I set up camp about 3 miles off one of the main trails. I remember the exact date, October 14th, a Friday. The weather was cool, maybe mid-60s during the day, dropping lower at night. The ground was soft with pine needles, and the air smelled like wet earth from a recent rain. I pitched my small tent, gathered some wood, and started a fire just before sundown. Everything felt normal. Peaceful, even. I ate, drank a couple of beers I'd packed, and sat watching the flames lick the logs. Around 10 o'clock, the forest got unnaturally quiet. I don't mean less crickets, I mean silent. No insects, no wind, no movement. The fire crackled too loud in the stillness, and it put me on edge. That was when I heard it. It started as faint scratching sounds. Not on my tent, but somewhere out in the trees. I thought maybe it was an armadillo or raccoon digging. I grabbed my flashlight, the heavy kind with a wide beam, and swept it across the woods. At first, nothing, just trunks and branches. Then, in the corner of the beam, something moved. It was low to the ground. At first I thought it was a deer that had crouched down, but when I angled the light I froze. It wasn't an animal. It was something crawling on all fours, except not in any way I'd ever seen before. Its elbows and knees bent the wrong way, like its joints were inverted. Its skin looked pale, almost gray, stretched thin over sharp bones. There wasn't a patch of hair on it. The head was too small, or maybe the shoulders were too wide. I couldn't tell. It stopped when the light hit it. Then, fast as hell, it scuttled sideways out of view, its limbs clicking on the ground like stiff branches. My heart thudded so loud I thought it might draw whatever it was back. I sat there gripping the flashlight, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light. Maybe a coyote diseased with mange, bones sticking out. Maybe I'd just scared myself. But then I heard it again. Not scratching this time, scuttling, circling. I swept the beam left, then right. Nothing. Then, a flash of movement closer, 10 feet out, then gone. Another flash, now behind me. It was circling me, darting just outside the edge of the light. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Get the hell out of here!" I threw a rock in the direction of the noise. For a few seconds, silence. Then the scuttling started again, even closer, like it was taunting me. That's when my gut told me something. I didn't want to admit this wasn't some sick animal. Animals don't circle you like that. They don't stop and wait for the light. They don't move with intention. I backed toward my tent, my hand shaking so bad the beam jittered across the trees. I caught it again, fully this time. It was crouched low, staring straight at me. Its limbs splayed out at angles that looked painful, its ribs heaving under that pale skin. Its face, God. Its face looked almost human, but too stretched, too long. The mouth opened slightly, but I didn't hear anything. Just the sound of my own breathing. Then it moved. Not away. Not toward me. It crawled up a tree. I swear on my life. It climbed with its stomach toward the bark, limbs bending backward, pulling itself higher in seconds until it disappeared into the canopy. That was the moment I did something I'm not proud of. I shut off my flashlight. It wasn't bravery, it was instinct, because every time I had the light on, it found me. It saw me. In the pitch black, I felt like maybe I was invisible again. So I sat there in total darkness, barely breathing. For hours, the fire died out. My legs cramped, but I didn't move. At some point, I must have dozed sitting up, because the next thing I remember was faint morning light filtering through the trees. I waited until the sun was fully up before I dared move. Then I packed everything in record time. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out of there. When I finally made it back to the trailhead, there was a ranger in the lot. He asked if I'd had a good trip. I almost told him what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come out. I just said, "Yeah, fine," and drove home. I didn't tell anyone for months. When I finally described it to a friend, he laughed and said I must have been drunk and seen a hog. But hogs don't climb trees. I've been camping since then, but never alone and never in Big Thicket. I don't think I'll ever go back there. Sometimes when I wake up at night, I think about how it stopped when I shined the light on it, how it circled me like it was deciding something, how it crawled above me into the trees. And I can't stop, wondering if when I finally turned off the flashlight, it didn't leave. What if it was above me the whole night, just watching, waiting? I wish I never set foot in the Sam Houston National Forest that summer. I still can't get the sound out of my head. It was June 2021, a hot, thick Texas afternoon when the air feels like it's sitting on your shoulders. My friends had all bailed on a planned camping trip, but I'd stubbornly decided to go alone. I'd been through those woods plenty of times before, and I told myself solitude would be good for me. The first night went fine. I set up my small tent in a clearing near a patch of pines, cooked some beans over a tiny stove, and listened to the cicadas hum like electricity pulsing through the air. The next day, though, I got this dumb idea in my head that I should make a proper fire pit. Something about doing it right, like the old-timers did, made the trip feel more authentic. Around late afternoon, I started digging. The ground was dry on top, but about a foot down it softened into a cool clay. I worked in silence, the smell of pine sap mixing with sweat until my shovel hit something solid. I crouched, expecting it to be a root, but the sound was wrong. It was a hollow thud, like striking the side of a wooden barrel. Curious, I brushed soil away until a patch of dark, smooth surface appeared. Wood, maybe, or stone polished by hands. My pulse picked up, but I kept going. Then I pressed my ear against it, half jokingly, like a kid playing archaeologist. That's when I heard it. A muffled scream. Not an animal, not some echo of the shovel. A human scream, ragged, desperate, as if someone had been buried alive. I yanked back so fast I nearly toppled over. My first instinct was denial. I told myself it had to be something else. Air escaping, some weird acoustics underground, a trick of my own imagination. I stood, frozen in the clearing, cicadas shrilling louder until I heard it again. A cry, fainter this time but layered with others, not one voice but several tangled together, wailing from beneath the earth. I dropped the shovel and shoved the dirt back in with my hands, covering it as fast as I could, choking on panic. My fingers tore against roots and clay. Every time, I pushed more soil over the hollow spot. The voices seemed to weaken as though I was smothering them. By the time the surface looked untouched, the sounds had faded completely. I didn't sleep that night. I lay inside my tent with my lantern burning until dawn, listening for any hint of movement outside, half expecting to hear scratching at the ground where I dug. But nothing came. When morning finally broke, I packed up and left without breakfast. I told myself to forget it. Just a strange moment in the woods. A story I'd laugh about later, except I can't forget, because the screams didn't stay in the ground. The first week back home, I thought I was fine. I went to work, answered emails, tried to shove the whole incident into the part of my brain reserved for bad dreams. But little things started to happen. It began with faint noises in the middle of the night. I live alone and my house is quiet, so I'm used to every creak. This was different, a thin, muffled sob that seemed to seep through the floorboards. I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, but as soon as I turned on the light, silence. By the third night, the sobs were joined by whispers. Not words I could understand, just a low chorus that rose and fell, like people muttering through cloth. I tore up half my carpet looking for vents or gaps where sound could carry. But the house is concrete slab. No crawl space, nothing underneath. A week later, I woke to my bedroom smelling of damp earth. I swear I saw clumps of dark soil scattered near the foot of the bed. I brushed them away, thinking maybe I'd tracked it in on my boots earlier. But then I noticed fingernail marks in the wood floor, shallow, ragged scratches that hadn't been there before. That night, I called my friend Mark, one of the guys who'd bailed on the camping trip. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told him what I'd thought I heard in the forest. He laughed it off at first, said I must have spooked myself. But when I told him about the sounds at home, he got quiet. "Man," he said finally, "you covered it back up, right? You didn't open it?" "No. I buried it as fast as I could. Then just leave it alone. Whatever it was. Don't go back." His voice had this edge to it, like he knew more than he wanted to say. I pressed him, but he just muttered something about old stories and hung up. By July, the noises grew constant. I'd hear faint screams while cooking, in the shower, even during conference calls at work. Nobody else could hear them. When I put my phone on speaker and held it near the floor, my coworker just asked why there was static. Sleep became impossible. Every night the voices got louder, closer, until they seemed to seep directly into my head. Sometimes they'd rise, in unison like dozens of throats shrieking at once, then cut off suddenly, leaving a silence worse than the sound itself. One night, I woke choking on dirt. My mouth was packed with it, damp, metallic, filling my throat. I stumbled to the bathroom, gagging and coughing until clumps of soil splattered the sink. When I turned on the light, my tongue bled from biting down on grit. But the sink was spotless, no dirt, nothing. That broke me. I stopped going to work. I stopped calling friends. I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. Then 2 weeks ago, I found something that nearly sent me back to that forest with a gas can. I was cleaning out my garage, trying to distract myself, when I noticed a patch of earth near the wall that looked freshly disturbed. I poked at it with a rake, and the ground collapsed inward, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside was the same dark, polished surface I'd struck in the woods. Before I could react, before I could even breathe, a scream erupted from it, deafening, so close it rattled my teeth. I dropped the rake and fell back, clutching my ears. But the scream wasn't muffled anymore. It was sharp, raw, and impossibly human. I filled the hole again, sobbing, my hands blistered from clawing at the soil. But I know it won't matter. Whatever I uncovered out there followed me home, and it wants out. I don't know how long I can take this. I haven't slept in 4 nights. My walls tremble with the sound of fists pounding from beneath the floor. Sometimes I think I hear my own name screamed in the chorus. I'm writing this at 3:47 a.m., the voices rising so loud the lamp shakes on my desk. I don't know why I'm posting this. Maybe someone's heard of this before. Maybe someone knows what I'm supposed to do, because the ground is cracking in my garage again, and this time I think they're almost through. They say a black dog follows the doomed. Old superstition, nothing more. My grandfather used to mutter about it when I was a kid, telling me that if you saw a black dog walking behind you and keeping pace, no matter how fast you went, your number was up. He'd say it like a joke, grinning while my grandmother would scold him for scaring me. I laughed it off growing up. Even into my 20s, when I started backpacking alone, I'd think of that story every now and then, when I caught myself glancing behind me on a trail. But I never truly believed it. That changed in October of last year, when I went camping alone in Davy Crockett National Forest. It was the kind of trip I had taken dozens of times before. I left Houston on a Friday afternoon, threw my gear in the trunk of my old Honda Accord, and drove north. By the time I reached the forest, the sun was a dull orange smudge sinking into the tree line. The air smelled of pine needles and dry leaves. That particular scent of fall that makes you nostalgic for things you can't quite name. I parked at a trailhead that I knew well. The plan was simple. Hike a few miles in, set up camp by one of the smaller creeks, spend 2 nights, and come back Sunday evening. I'd done it so many times I could practically walk the trail blindfolded. The first night was uneventful. I built a small fire, ate freeze-dried chili from a pouch, and read by headlamp until the fire sank into glowing embers. The night was still and quiet, the kind of silence that city people don't realize exists until they've been swallowed by it. I slept well. The next day, I decided to push further into the forest than usual. There was a spot I had always wanted to check out, a stretch of trail that veered off from the creek and curved up into higher ground. It was late afternoon by the time I set off, but I figured I had enough daylight to reach the ridge, look around, and head back before dark. About half an hour in, I noticed something strange. When you're in the woods long enough, you get used to the sounds: birds, insects, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. That day, all of that seemed to fade. The forest got quieter with every step I took, as though something were pressing pause on the world around me. The air felt heavier too, cooler despite the mild weather. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. At first, I thought maybe another hiker had come up the trail. I turned, expecting to see someone with a pack, but the path was empty. I stood there for a long minute, listening. Nothing. I told myself I was just being paranoid. That sound carries strangely in the woods. I started walking again. The footsteps started too. They weren't loud, just the faint crunch of leaves. Always about 10 paces behind me, I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned again, scanning the trail. This time I saw it. A dog. Black as midnight, its fur blending into the shadows. It was bigger than a lab, leaner, with long legs and a narrow face. Its eyes glowed faintly in the fading light, not reflecting like an animal's eyes usually do, but emitting their own dull yellow light like embers. I froze. The dog just stood there, head low, watching me. "Hey, boy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where'd you come from?" No collar, no sound, just those eyes. I took a step toward it and it stepped back. Still 10 paces between us, I turned and started walking again, faster now. The dog followed. No matter how quickly I moved, it stayed the same distance behind me. When I slowed, it slowed. Always 10 paces. By the time I reached camp, the sun had completely gone. I dropped my pack by the fire ring and spun around. The trail was empty. The dog was gone. I barely slept that night. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind against the tent fabric made me sit up and listen. I didn't hear the dog again, but I couldn't shake the image of those eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The next morning I found the paw prints. They were just outside the ring of my campsite, pressed deep into the soft earth. Bigger than any domestic dog I'd ever seen. They circled the tent once and then stopped, side by side with my own prints from the night before, as if the thing had walked with me all the way in. But here's the part that chilled me. The paw prints ended there. Not a single one leading away. It was like the dog had vanished into thin air. I left that morning, earlier than I'd planned. I kept looking back over my shoulder the entire hike out. Every time I half expected to see it again, keeping pace just 10 paces behind. But the trail stayed empty. That was almost a year ago. Since then, I've seen it twice more. Once in the rearview mirror of my car on a back road outside of Lufkin. I was driving alone, the forest thick on either side. For a split second, the reflection caught those same faint yellow eyes pacing the car, keeping stride with me at 50 miles per hour. Then they were gone. The second time was worse. I was in my apartment, asleep, when I woke up to the sound of claws clicking on tile. My heart nearly stopped. I live on the 3rd floor. No pets. No way for an animal to get in. The sound circled my bed once. When I finally got the courage to turn on the light, nothing was there. But in the thin layer of dust on the floor, I saw them. Paw prints. Huge, blackened impressions. They led right up to my side of the bed. And stopped. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it follows me. But if my grandfather was right, then I think I already know the answer. I just don't know when. Half asleep in my tent, I sensed someone watching. I opened my eyes to see a man-shaped shadow pressing against the fabric. I whispered, "Who's there?" The figure bent close, so close I should have seen his features. But there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just skin. It was the first week of October last year, when I decided to take a solo camping trip in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. I know, the story title makes it sound like I'm about to dive straight into the supernatural, but trust me, this started as a perfectly normal weekend. The days had just begun cooling after that brutal summer. The weather app had promised mid-60s during the day and mid-40s at night. Crisp, clear air, just chilly enough for a fire. The sky was supposed to be clear too, perfect for stargazing. I'd been working a stressful stretch at my job in Little Rock. Deadlines stacked on top of deadlines, the kind where your boss breathes down your neck about reports nobody's going to read. I needed a break, and since I don't really have friends who enjoy camping, I went alone. It wasn't my first time. I'd done solo trips before. You learn to double-check your gear and be mindful of your surroundings. The quiet out there can be intimidating if you're not used to it, but I'd grown to like it. I got there Friday afternoon. My chosen spot was about a mile hike off one of the less popular trails. I had it marked on my GPS from an earlier trip with my cousin, a little clearing near a creek surrounded by tall pines and oaks. You could hear the water moving, even from the fire ring. When I got there, it was just as peaceful as I remembered. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. I set up camp like I always do. Tent first, then firewood, then I made sure to string my food up in a bear bag. By the time the sun dipped low, everything was ready. I cooked a simple dinner, ramen with some jerky tossed in. Not gourmet, but filling. I sat by the fire for a while, watching sparks drift into the dark canopy, and eventually crawled into my tent around 10:30. That first night was uneventful. A few animal sounds, branches snapping in the woods, but nothing out of the ordinary. I slept fine. Saturday was the kind of day you wish you could bottle up. The sky was deep blue, no clouds. I spent the morning hiking a loop trail, maybe 6 miles. Saw no one the entire time, which was part of why I came. Privacy, solitude. Back at camp, I napped in my hammock, cooked another fire meal, and started reading the paperback I'd brought. The weirdness started that evening. It wasn't dramatic at first, just subtle things. As the sun went down, the forest grew strangely quiet. Normally, you'd expect frogs by the creek, crickets in the grass, owls calling. But around dusk, it was like someone had hit mute on the entire forest. Even the breeze seemed to stop. I remember sitting by the fire, noticing how loud my own movements felt. The crack of wood shifting, the scrape of my fork against the metal pan. The silence pressed against me. I told myself it was fine. That maybe the air pressure had changed, maybe predators were moving through. Coyotes, maybe. That happens. Still, by the time I crawled into my tent, I was a little on edge. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something brushing against the nylon wall of my tent. Not scratching, not clawing, just dragging. A slow press, like fingertips tracing the fabric. My first thought was raccoon. Maybe it smelled the food bag, though I'd tied it far from the site. I stayed still, holding my breath, listening. The brushing moved, circling halfway around the tent. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then it stopped, right near my head. That's when I saw the shadow. The moon was bright enough to outline things through the tent wall, and clear as day I could see the shape of a man leaning close. Shoulders, head, arms. It wasn't an animal. Someone was standing inches from me with only the nylon between us. My throat went dry. I whispered, "Who's there?" The shadow leaned closer, pressing against the fabric, so close I should have seen details, hair, a nose, the outline of lips. But there was nothing, just the featureless oval of a head, smooth, blank. I don't know how long I stared. My body locked up, every instinct screaming not to move. Then, without a sound, the figure withdrew. The shadow pulled back into the night and the silence outside swallowed everything again. I lay awake until morning, gripping the pocket knife I kept in my pack. When daylight finally came, I stumbled outside to look. The ground around the tent was undisturbed. No footprints in the soft dirt, no broken branches, just a still forest as if nothing had happened. Part of me wanted to pack up and hike out right then, but another part, the stubborn, rational part, told me I must have dreamed it. Maybe the moonlight distorted things, maybe I was half asleep, and imagined the smooth face. I convinced myself it was nothing. That Saturday passed uneventfully, but I couldn't relax. Every little noise made me jump. By evening, when I tried to light a fire, my hands shook so badly I had to steady them. Night fell again. This time, I couldn't bring myself to sleep right away. I sat in the tent with my flashlight on, reading, until my eyes burned. Around midnight, I turned it off, curled in my sleeping bag, knife at my side. The silence returned. Not just quiet, an oppressive stillness like the forest was holding its breath. Then came the sound again. That faint brushing on the nylon wall. I froze. The shadow appeared once more. Same man shape, same faceless head bending toward me. Only this time I swear I heard it breathe. A slow inhale. A long exhale, right against the fabric. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey. And then, God help me, it spoke. Not in words I understood, not in any language I recognized. Just a low murmur vibrating through the fabric, like a voice pushed through clenched teeth. I remember clamping my hands over my ears, shutting my eyes, whispering, "Go away, go away, go away." When I finally opened them, the shadow was gone. At dawn, I didn't even make breakfast. I stuffed everything into my pack, barely rolling the tent, and hiked out without looking back. I've told myself 100 times it was a dream, or sleep, paralysis or stress from work. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The worst part is that sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear that breathing, and I wonder if leaving the woods was enough. I don't camp anymore. I used to love it. The quiet, the smell of pine and damp earth. The sound of crickets working like a living metronome outside the thin nylon walls of my tent. I'd spend whole weekends out there, alone or sometimes with a friend, nursing a fire until it turned to embers, falling asleep with that rare feeling of being away from the world. But this story is about the last time I ever camped. I don't talk about it much, and I haven't written it down before. Maybe writing it here will get it out of my head. It was late October 2019, along the Red River in northern Texas, about a mile or so from the border. I knew the spot well. I'd been there maybe 6 or 7 times before. A little clearing just off a game trail, far enough from the river that the mosquitoes weren't unbearable, close enough to hear the water moving when the night got especially. Still, that Friday afternoon, the weather was perfect. Mid-60s, dry, just enough cloud cover to turn the sunset into this washed-out watercolor sky. I got to the spot around 5, pitched my tent, and collected a decent pile of firewood before it got dark. Dinner was the usual. Burnt hot dogs on sticks, a couple of cans of cheap beer, and half a bag of trail mix I'd been working through all week. Everything felt normal. Around 9, the fire had burned down enough that I stopped feeding it and let it shrink into glowing orange clumps. I crawled into the tent, stretched out on my sleeping bag, and scrolled my phone for a while until the battery dipped into the red. With no service that far out, I was just rereading old messages and staring at pictures I'd already seen 100 times. I think I drifted off a little before midnight. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard my own voice. Not outside, not muffled, not echoing. Right next to me, it whispered directly into my ear, "Stay with us." I sat up so fast I nearly tore the zipper off the tent flap. The fire outside had gone completely out. There was no glow left at all, not even a faint coal. The air inside. The tent felt colder than it should have been, like something had seeped in with me while I slept. My heart was beating so hard it made my ribs ache. I sat there in the dark for I don't know how long, listening. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too loudly. And I swear I could still feel the warmth of someone's breath on the side of my face, even though I was alone. Eventually, I told myself it was a dream, a hypnagogic hallucination, or whatever. The word is for when your brain makes you think you're awake while you're still half asleep. I'd read about those before. Maybe I just freaked myself out. But then I heard it again. This time it came from the corner of the tent, low and deliberate, like someone crouched in there with me. "You're already here." It was my voice. Not close, but not muffled either, like if you recorded me and played it back in the same room. I didn't unzip the tent, I didn't move a muscle. I think if I had, I wouldn't be here writing this. The rest of the night is a blur of waiting, forcing myself not to scream, and counting every minute until I saw the first faint gray light pushing through the nylon. The second I could see outside, I threw everything into my car. Left my sleeping bag, the tent, the cooler, everything. I didn't care. I got in, started the engine, and drove until the sun was fully up. When I finally stopped at a gas station near Wichita Falls, I looked in the mirror. There was dirt, smeared, on the side of my face like someone had touched me while I was asleep. A handprint, faint but unmistakable. That was my last camping trip. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I'm lying awake in bed, I hear it again. My own voice whispering just behind my ear, "Stay with us."